Hello and welcome to Policy and Politics with me, Tarun Nangia. Our guest today is a career bureaucrat who has spent well over 38 years in the bureaucracy. He was brought in to lead the project monitoring committee in the cabinet secretariat when projects worth 22 lakh crores were stuck. He drove the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana. He took charge of the coal sector at a very critical time and transformed it. And then was a part of the Human Resource Development Ministry. He is now going on to take charge as the CEO of the Jharkhand Government State Development Council, where he will also be the chairman of the executive committee. Mr. Anil Swarup, welcome to our show. So, you are known as some sort of an exception in the bureaucracy, where instead of being round and sweet like a jalebi, your image is that of a very frank, upfront and straight-talking bureaucrat. Has that helped you perform, or has that troubled you also?
It has helped me perform. I think if you're straight and if you're known to be straight, you don't have to use the tortuous route of achieving things. You go straight, do it and get out of it.
So it has helped you?
Certainly it has helped me.
And has it troubled you sometime?
On occasions. In any case, whatever you do, there will be troubles around, and that's the beauty of this service. It's how you manage your troubles that matters.
Okay. So now we'll go to your tenure in the Cabinet Secretariat. You took charge of the Project Monitoring Committee in July 2013. At that time when there were 22 lakh crore worth of projects stuck and you got so many clearances rapidly, can you share some insights about the problem and how did you go about solving it?
You know, the primary problem was the delays in clearances. It's not that they were not required to be cleared. They were required to be cleared and they were okay. But the atmosphere in the government was such, with all the scams around, that civil servants were averse to taking quick decisions. And that is what the project monitoring group did. What we tried to do was to bring in a very transparent system, where all the decisions were put on the portal as soon as they were taken. So no one had any problems with taking decisions per se, so long as they were assured that they would not be called to question for bona fide decisions. So what we did was that through this transparent system, the world knew that a person or an officer was sitting on file for so long, and as I jokingly say, no matter how inefficient we are, to the world we'd like to appear to be efficient, and that's why the decisions did get taken, and by God's grace and all the cooperation that I got from the ministries, a lot of projects got cleared.
So you brought in transparency, and you backed up your officers saying that for bona fide decisions, I'll ensure that you are not hauled up.
More than that, you know, when the decisions are taken in a transparent manner, even if there are bona fide mistakes, they get to be known at that point in time. Transparency helps you do that.
So you mean getting in this central computerization that you spoke about?
Yes, so we set up this web portal wherein an industry that had a problem could put in their problem, and the problem automatically went to a designated joint secretary in the concerned ministry. He used to comment on that. Then we used to have tripartite discussions, and post discussions there were no minutes issued. The minutes were directly dictated onto the portal. So it was totally transparent. We're using technology to the hilt, making it transparent, so things started moving.
So you mean even if a problem happened, it was corrected then and there?
Not necessarily then and there,
yes.
But as it was mentioned, over a period of time we discussed it across the table in tripartite discussions. And it was not merely that decision was in favor of industry. A number of occasions it was clearly told to the industry that such a decision is not possible, it is contrary to the rules. And in a number of cases the industries felt good about it because they were told that it can be done or it can't be done. If it was to be done, it was done immediately.
Okay. Now we will go ahead and talk about your stint, which was very popular and known and discussed in the coal sector. It was radically transformed once you took over as secretary. Coal auctions were initiated. The acute shortage of coal was converted to surplus. Where you had to tell your so many factories and these power plants that why don't you pick up lift coal from our collieries. The sector was in news, but not necessarily for the right reasons until you took over. I think it was a very difficult decision to accept that appointment.
No, it was not at all. In fact, when I did take over as coal secretary, I asked somebody how the coal sector is. And he asked me a counter question. He asked me, gangs of Asepur dekhi hai kya? So that was my introduction to coal sector. But I looked at it differently. Anything that could have gone wrong with the coal sector had gone wrong. So I could take credit for any improvement that would come about. It couldn't become worse. And by God's grace, I ended up with a fantastic team. The real problem in the coal sector was not the coal block auctions. That was the visible part of it.
Okay.
The real problem was the shortage of coal.
Yes.
Because had there not been shortage of coal, wouldn't have been so much maramari about coal blocks that were allocated earlier. We were very clear in our mind that if we sort out the coal supply problem, the coal production problem, much of the other problems will be taken care of. So we focused, apart from the initial period spent on auctioning coal blocks, the focus was totally on improving coal production, and that really helped.
Okay, if I may take the liberty to ask, until you were there in the coal ministry, we saw the graph going up. Not more so now necessarily we see that the shortages have again come up in the recent, if I say,
shortages are comparative. In fact, the coal production is indeed going up even now.
Okay.
But probably it's not as much as the requirement, and there are other related issues. For example, I am told, that's the information that I have, that hydro production has come down. Yes. So consequently, the demand on the thermal power plant, one nuclear plant is closed. Yes. So there has been a shortage of supply of power from other sources. So the focus is again coal, and there is a greater demand of coal.
So when production is going up, but the demand is rising much faster.
Much faster. Demand is rising.
Okay, now if we go back to a scheme which you were at the helm of, the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, so essential in a country of 125 crore people, largely poor. Could you share with us in a bit of detail about the government's initiative, how you drove it, and what are the learnings from that? Especially because this government is going ahead and launching the Ayushaman Bharat Yojana, and you have had a hands-on experience about implementing an earlier scheme. How do you see that both happening and your experience?
First of all, I would like to compliment the government for thinking in terms of providing this wide health insurance cover. It's the need of the hour. Yes. For me, that those six and a half years spent in Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana were the finest of my career, because I was attempting to address the health-related issues of the poorest of the poor in the country. They really require it. I didn't have much of an idea about health insurance before I took over this sector and started working on this scheme. But gradually I came to understand a single incident of such health problem could put many people into poverty, and poor suffered the most because they didn't have the wherewithal. And hence it was indeed the need of the hour then, it is still the need of the hour for them. Now how we went about was to understand the characteristics of the poor man, and those were as follows. Number one, he was poor and he could not pay upfront the money and claim it from somewhere else, because if he had the money he would do it. He doesn't have that, so the scheme had to be cashless. Then most of these poor people were illiterate, so we couldn't have long documents of insurance for him to sign.
Yes.
So the scheme had to be paperless. And finally, a large number of these poor people moved from one place to the other, and hence the scheme had to be portable.
Yes.
So we didn't have a portable, paperless, cashless until then, here or elsewhere in the world. Portability was something very unique with that scheme, that a person from Bihar could get a benefit in Gujarat. He could carry his smart card there and get the benefit there. So that is how the scheme worked. I'm glad it worked and benefited a large number of people. But it was limited in the sense of providing benefit only up to 30,000 crores. Sorry, 30,000 per family.
30,000 per family.
Per family. And I'm glad that the government now has increased that amount to 5 lakh per family. So it will really help the poor if it is implemented appropriately.
And you see the learnings of Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana being embedded into Ayushaman Bharat going forward?
I would believe that. I don't know how much of it is embedded, but I would believe that the learnings of RSBY could be very useful for the current scheme as well.
Because the case in point which you told about the smart card, so you have taken care of migrant laborers. If they land up in Gujarat from Bihar for work and they get ill, they are covered. So you thought that through 10 years ago.
Yes, I'm quite certain that the government would have thought about these aspects while formulating the scheme. Okay. And I'm sure they will take care of these aspects.
One comment do I want from you, because you have a first-hand experience of implementing the Swasthya Bima Yojana. What kind of a Herculean task is to implement, especially because we are implementing it via the private sector, and these are big companies who are going to be involved. A challenge at the policy level, second at the implementation. How do you see that panning out?
You know, RSBY was a classic example of public-private partnership to roll out a social sector scheme.
Okay.
And I'm convinced that it has to be in partnership with the private sector, that such scheme has to be rolled out. Let me explain what are the areas in which private sector could come in. Number one, hospitals of the private sector. Yes. Obviously, just the government hospitals, if they were sufficient and good enough to provide health care, we would not even have thought about this health insurance scheme. And hence, it is necessary to engage with the private sector hospitals to deliver this scheme. That is one engagement of the private sector. The other engagement of the private sector would be through private sector insurance companies. I would believe that they would also have a very important role to play, as they did in RSPY. In both these segments, private sector will be very, very, very important. In RSPY, there was another dimension to it. It was in terms of delivery of smart cards. That was not done by the government agencies. It was done by the private agencies, and it worked pretty well. So my contention is it has to be a partnership of public and private for any scheme of this scale to succeed. Just the private or just the public will not. Secondly, it will provide a very healthy competition between public and private, whether in terms of insurance, whether in terms of healthcare, it will provide, and it will bring about efficiencies both in the public and private sector.
Okay, so you say it's a win-win situation.
Yes, it is win-win. It implemented, you have to take care of a few things. You have to have cross-check, balance, all that will be required. I'm sure there would be such factors built in the scheme.
In about 2 lines, if you could tell me, if you implemented a 30,000 per family scheme, and this is a 5 lakh scheme covering 125 crore people, even to think for us, this is an insurmountable task. How big a task is this, despite all that is available to the bureaucracy in terms of manpower and resources?
It's a huge task. It's a huge challenge. But that's the beauty of it. The challenges have to be huge, and if the challenges are huge, you enjoy it even more. And I'm sure that the present team that is implementing, headed by a very efficient officer, Mr. Indu Bhushan, he's worked with me long ago when he just started his career. I rate him, as a probationer. He's one of the finest officers we have. I'm glad that the government has brought him in, and I'm sure he'll make it a success.
Okay, you sound very optimistic. Now, in the past 1.5 years, you're part of the education sector. We all saw your Twitter feeds of you going to states all across the country and visiting schools in villages, driving the NGOs to deliver. Could you share with us a few key things that have a problem in the sector, and what are the solutions that you had thought of, and give your overall analysis of the sector of what you learned? Were you shocked, or what is about the sector that you would like to tell the people?
After a month of my experience in education sector, someone asked me, how are you finding this sector?
Yes.
So I responded by saying, in coal, all the mining was underground and the mafias were overground.
Yes.
In the education, it's the other way around. All the mafias are underground. You've got to mine them out,
yes,
and then take them on. Yes. That's what we try to do.
Yes.
But jokes apart, I think we have focused too much on center for providing solutions to the problems relating to education. Yes. And probably that is the reason we haven't been able to find too many solutions. I think the solutions are there in the field, and I discovered it myself. As I traveled to about 24 states in the first 3 months of my existence as Education Secretary, I discovered some marvelous work being done in the field. So we identified about 111 such models which were working in the field, some in the private domain, some in the public domain, some in the joint sector domain, doing wonderful work. And then we had a workshop of 6 days wherein we intensively discussed each of these models with the persons who were implementing these models. We selected about 24, 25 such models out of these 111 and took them back to the states, asked them to scale those models. Now the beauty is these models are getting scaled. Now why is it happening? It's happening because earlier we were trying to find solutions to the problems of this country in England, Finland, Scotland, Holland, New Zealand, and even Swaziland, but not in the homeland. And when we saw the work being done in the motherland, the chances of these models scaling are much more because they are successful in the objective conditions as obtained in this country. I don't have to create those conditions. So if a model that is working in a part of the country, the likelihood of that model getting replicated and scaled is much more than the model that is imported from abroad. Yes. And that's how it happened. So give you an example. I walk into a school in the state of Maharashtra, about 120 kilometers north of Thane, yes, in Pastepada, where I find a school teacher, primary school teacher, turning a school totally digital without electricity using solar panels.
Okay.
Now that's a model which we thought could be replicated elsewhere. And see what happens in a year and a half. That model gets replicated in 60,000 schools of Maharashtra.
60,000?
Yes, and this money of 350 odd crores comes from the CSR. So that's the classiest example of public-private partnership in delivering a social sector scheme. So what I'm trying to suggest here is that there are very many successful models operational within the country. We have to have the eye for them, and that's why I started this whole concept of nexus of good, identifying these good practices, trying to understand how it happened, trying to replicate it and trying to scale it, and getting everyone around it to see that if it has happened in a particular state, it can happen in another state as well. I'm not saying it will happen, but it certainly can, because it has happened. So my logic is very simple. Anything that has happened, the chances of it getting scaled are much more than anything that may not have happened. I'm not saying we should not innovate, we should not improve, we should. But if something is already happening, what we do is to take notice of it, recognize it, appreciate it, replicate it and scale it.
Okay, so taking a cue from how you acted when you were in the ministry, you traveled extensively to various states, saw those models, and that's why they could be replicated. If you could give us a few pointers, how important it is for the policymaker sitting in the secretariat in the Delhi to go to these states, see these models and do it like you did, because I don't know, many secretaries may not be finding time to go to states and maybe sitting in their offices in Delhi. How important is it?
No, I learned it in Project Monitoring Group as Coal Secretary and Education Secretary. In all these cases, I discovered very clearly that center is by and large a fiction.
Yes.
Actual action lies in the states.
Yes.
So we have to learn from the states. We have to learn from what is happening on the ground. And the policies should be based on our learnings or what is actually happening on the ground rather than the other way around. Normally what happens is we formulate a policy sitting here without understanding the ground realities that they exist, and hence those policies don't get implemented. The problem that this country has, which I've discovered through my 38 years, is that everyone feels that the wisdom exists with him. I think the wisdom is all over the country. You have to go around and collect that wisdom. And the policies should not merely be policies, it has to be associated with a clear-cut action plan as to what needs to be done, how it will be done, who will do it, by when it will be done. Without that action plan, those policies are meaningless. We should not have pure policies in the countries. We should have policies followed by action plan, and policies determined out of understanding of ground realities as they exist on the ground, rather than some expert sitting here or a set of experts sitting in Delhi trying to formulate policies. I don't think such policies get ever implemented.
Okay, that's a very important point. But on that note, we'll take a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Just before the break, we saw Mr. Swarup sharing with us how policies can better be implemented. But now taking this discussion ahead, sir, I may want to ask you these two things. Can transformation be done in any sector, and you headed so many of them, by getting stakeholders, the private sector, together on the discussion table and then formulating the policy? Is that route the way ahead?
That is the only way ahead. You have to take into confidence the stakeholders. Yes. Because ultimately the stakeholders are going to be impacted by what you're going to formulate as a policy.
Right.
So it is better to take them into account. We may disagree, but at least we would have had some of the wisdom that may exist outside. And then while formulating a policy, we would have accounted for the possible objections that the stakeholders may have, rather than giving them just like that a policy and then they start shouting that this policy is good, bad. I did that throughout my career. In coal, when we did those auctions, I don't think anyone objected to the processes that we brought in. They didn't object because all the objections were taken care of before we announced the policy of coal auction. So every time we went and put our policy, draft policy on the portal, called the stakeholders for discussions, had discussions with them, either got convinced by their argument or convinced them with our argument. And when we came up with a policy, it was acceptable to everyone. The process was acceptable to everyone. And that is why the auctions were very smooth.
Right. So now taking this process ahead, there is this huge discussion within the bureaucracy, outside the bureaucracy, of the generalist versus the specialist. And so now we have the decision of getting in private sector talent as joint secretaries in the bureaucracy in 10 ministries to start with. Somebody who spent his whole life in the bureaucracy, how do you look at this whole process, the various reports that have been coming out of the administrative reforms, and your pointed views on it?
I'm very surprised at the nature of the debate that is going on. Yes. I am personally convinced and am of the view that as you go up the hierarchy, you don't really necessarily have to have domain expertise.
Yes.
Any expertise that you require relates to how you manage men and women in your organization.
Yes.
You have to become the principal facilitator in enabling that expert to function in the manner that he should.
Yes.
The leader should be able to manage the ecosystem.
Yes.
The leader should be able to manage men.
Yeah.
Merely knowing a particular domain or understanding a particular domain may help a bit, but I don't think that's the essence. You look at even the private sector, the top chief executive officers or the top management, they're not domain experts.
Yes.
They're people who can manage men and women. They're people who can manage experts. They're people who can enable experts to perform. And I'm very convinced that so is the case with the bureaucracy. All this nonsense about specialization, I think specialization has to be in the domain of managing men and women rather than anything else. You can always find specialists who can help you, assist you, but if you are open, if you are able to support your team, if you are able to motivate your team, if you are able to provide the right atmosphere for your team, that is what is required, not a specialization in a particular.
Okay, very candid about that. But especially on decision making, you have been very vocal over the past few years. You were very vocal when you spoke about the CVC or the court process that hinders bureaucrats from making decisions. There are certain provisions in the Prevention of Corruption Act that are now acting as a hindrance. What, in your view, needs to be sorted out to ensure that bureaucrats can easily take decisions rather than bide time just for the fear that they might be hauled up after retirement?
You are absolutely correct. I think there are a number of inhibiting factors in taking decisions. All the civil servants are taking huge risks in terms of taking decisions because they can be hauled up for decisions taking bona fide, and that could be questioned subsequently. And hence there is a need for amending Article 31, Section 13(1)(d) of the Prevention of Corruption Act. It is essential to, because otherwise this Damocles sword will always be hanging, and that will deter the civil servants to take decisions as they should.
That needs to be done. Second, you spoke of man management. I don't know whether this is a reflective example, but you yourself once said that in a particular state, if teachers come to school, it becomes news that today teacher has come to school. And in the other state in the same country, if teachers don't come to school, it is news. So when we have employed millions of teachers across the country, this is a problem of man management. In a country of 125 crore people, how can these kind of problems be solved?
So what really needs to be done is to understand the why of a problem. Normally we don't do that. There is a problem, understand what the problem is very clearly.
Yes.
And then try and understand why that problem exists.
Okay.
Once you understand the why of a problem, the chances of finding solutions are much more. But if you don't go into the details of why a problem has occurred, then we are in serious trouble.
Right.
We will keep talking about it, but we'll never find a solution. To give you an example, going back to my coal experience, the real problem in coal was not coal block auctions.
Right.
The real problem was the shortage of coal. There are chances that you'll be able to devise a strategy to overcome these problems.
Okay. So, do you think we still end up making these basic mistakes?
Yes, we do. Because a number of us want instant solutions to problems, which sometimes don't exist. In sometimes you can, but in other times you have to go into the details of finding the cause of the problem for finding a solution, and it takes a bit of time.
Now, taking our discussion ahead, there is this huge talk within the bureaucracy, outside the bureaucracy, that the retirement age of bureaucrats is too less. The life expectancy when these retirement ages were decided was about 37, 38. Life expectancy today on paper is 67. But if you see the middle class and the higher middle class, you people live well up to 90 years of age. Bureaucrats outside, once they retire, can be seen working up to right till the age of 80. And we have many examples right in Delhi itself. Do you think that the government should, and time has come to rethink the retirement age, maybe 65, maybe more?
No, I have a slightly different view on this. My personal view is that the ultimate bottom line is bringing about efficiency and use and making use of those efficiencies in bureaucracy.
Yes.
When he's in service.
Yes.
Now, the contention is not whether every bureaucrat should be given age up to 65 years.
Right.
The contention should be whether there is a reasonable stability of tenure.
Right.
There is, and that stability of tenure is primarily at the highest level. So if a Secretary Government of India has, say, about 12 months or 14 months or 15 months in a particular organization, I don't think he'll be able to contribute substantially. In my personal view, there should be at least 2 to 3 years given to every Secretary Government of India so that he can think in terms of bring about change. I'll give you my own example. I had 2 years in coal. That helped me understand the coal sector and sort some of its problem. If there is a civil servant for 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, as is the case in some of the cases, I don't think he will be able to contribute substantially. So the focus should be on providing stability of tenure to the Secretaries Government of India rather than increasing age for everyone to 65. It may help that particular individual to be there. But if the objective is to bring about efficiencies in the systems, then the decision to provide a fixed tenure or a longer tenure to secretary will be much more beneficial as compared to across the board increasing the age of retirement.
2 quick points on this. A, some positions even now have tenure security. Second, in the private sector, the shareholders decide and the CEO is given 2 years and to show his performance indicators, otherwise he's booted out of his position. How could that model in a way be replicated to ensure performance in government departments?
It is already happening, but it has to happen even more. In the context of first determining the outcomes that are expected of a civil servant. That should be clearly outlined. And some of it is being done because upfront every year we list out what you plan to do in that particular year.
Yes.
But this can be formalized even further, where clear outcomes could be determined and the bureaucrat should be allowed to show to everyone around that he's able to deliver this, what he plans to do at the beginning of his career as Secretary Government of India.
Okay.
But having said that, I would still like to say that a particular tenure of maybe 2 to 3 years is absolutely imperative for any secretary to actually show any change. And secondly, if you want to hold somebody responsible for not doing it, he can always walk away by saying, I was there for about a year and 14 months and I couldn't do much.
Yes.
But why do you give him that excuse? First, you select the appropriate person, give him that fixed tenure.
Selection is priority.
Selection is absolutely critical.
It cannot be that some people have an attitude, kisi ko bhi le aao, I can get the work done.
No, I don't think it works that way. But in a career of say 34, 35 years, when this person is considered to become Secretary Government of India, you would have known that officer pretty well. Yes. He's pretty well known whether he can deliver or he can't deliver. And once you select that officer, then give him security of tenure of a particular period of time and allow him to perform.
Okay. On that note, I think we will, what you can say, call an end to this episode. But we want to wish you all the best for the new challenge that you have taken up in the state of Jharkhand. We would like to keep track of what you do there and again look forward to interviewing you once you show another round of achievements. But our best wishes to you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. So this was Anil Swarup, very freely and frankly as always, discussing everything that he did in the bureaucracy and also about his upcoming challenge in the state of Jharkhand. Thank you so much, viewers, for joining us on this episode of Policy and Politics. Thank you.